Elasticity. Elasticity is the measure of percent change in one variable in response to the percent change in another variable. If factor A changes so much percent, then how will it affect factor B as a percent? And the four that we need to know are price elasticity of demand, which is how a percent change in price of a product will affect the quantity demand of that product as a percent change. Cross elasticity of demand, which looks at two different products and how the percent change in price of one will affect the percent change in quantity demand of another. Income elasticity of demand, which looks at how the percent change of consumer income will affect the percent change of quantity demand of a product. And price elasticity of supply, which is in a way opposite of price elasticity of demand, looks at how a percent change in price of a product will affect the percent change of quantity supplied of that product. We're going to look at each of the four separately. Probably the more common elasticity of them all is price elasticity of demand. And the formula for price elasticity of demand, like all formulas, will help. If you know the formula, you'll understand the concept. It's percent delta QD over percent delta P, the percent change in quantity demand over the percent change in price, or how much the percent change in quantity demand changes in response to a percent change in price. And so really, there's two values that you're looking for. Will it be greater than 1 or less than 1? The values actually are always negative, but we're looking at the absolute value, because the law of demand says as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, and as price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. So a percent change in price will always lead to the opposite change in quantity demanded. It's really the amount of change that we're looking at. Anyway, a PED value that is greater than 1 reveals that the product is PED elastic, and a PED value of less than 1 reveals that the product is PED inelastic. And basic algebraic knowledge of a fraction shows you this. If PED is greater than 1, it means that there was a proportionally larger percent in quantity demand change compared to the percent change in price. And if PED is less than 1, it means there was a proportionally small percent change in quantity demand compared to the percent change in price, thus elastic and inelastic. And there are four determinants to PED that you should be aware of. The first is necessity. If an item is of high necessity, it tends to be inelastic. Substitutes. If a product has very few substitutes, it tends to be inelastic. Definition. If a product is very broadly defined, it tends to be inelastic. Now those three are all related. If a product is of a necessity, then it has very few substitutes typically. And so, again, when things have few substitutes, it means that people have few other options. So when the price changes a lot, quantity demanded doesn't really change too much because people don't have other options in the marketplace. Definition the same way. When an item is broadly defined, such as food, there's not a lot of alternatives to food. But as I narrow that definition and I separate between vegetables and meat, and then within meat I separate among different types of meat, like chicken versus beef. As I narrow my definition, there are many more substitutes to beef than there are substitutes to just meat in general, than there are substitutes to food. So the broader the definition, the less substitutes, and again, the more inelastic. And then time is kind of unique. It's almost a separate factor that influences price elasticity of demand. If we're talking about a short period of time, PED tends to be inelastic because over a short period of time, consumers don't really have a chance to react. While over a long period of time, if there's a change in price, consumers will change their habits more over a long period of time. And so, over a long period of time, we'll see PED to be elastic. But again, 4 reasons PED is inelastic. An item is of great necessity. An item has few substitutes. An item is broadly defined. And/or the change in price occurs over a short period of time, giving consumers little time to change their habits. How do you use PED in a business decision? Well, the rule is, if a product is PED inelastic, then if you want to increase revenue as a firm, you want to try to increase your price. And if a product is elastic, you're better off trying to decrease your price if you're trying to increase revenue. So, PED inelastic, increase price. You see the mnemonic device there, inelastic, increase price. The goal for any firm is, of course, to increase revenue. Now, changing prices might present other challenges, but as a general rule, PED will tell you as a firm what option you should pursue. Let's look at the example of gasoline. So there's a fictional gas station that at the original price of $4, they sold 100 gallons a day. Original P, $4, original quantity demanded, 100 units. A month later, they changed their prices, and they changed the price to $5 a gallon, and they only sell 90 gallons. So new price is $5, new quantity demand is 90. Well, if you look at the change in price from $4 to $5, that's a 25% increase in price, but there's only a modest decrease in demand from 100 gallons or units to 90 gallons or units, a 10% decrease. And if we put in the math and we do percent delta QD over percent delta P, which is negative 10% over positive 25%, we drop the sign, we get a value of 0.4. The numerator is smaller than the denominator, so sure enough it's less than 1. And gasoline is inelastic. Why is gasoline inelastic? Well, it's a necessity. There are very few substitutes. There are really no substitutes as far as making your car run. It's broadly defined. We're not talking about specific type of gas or specific brand. And in this example I gave, it even was over a short period of time. Consumers aren't going to really change their gas consumption habits in just a month. And so the rule for inelastic, because we identified the product as inelastic using the values, is it's a better idea to increase prices when a product is inelastic. So if we actually do the math, at $4 they were selling 100 gallons. 4 times 100, they were making $400 in revenue. At $5, they still sold 90 gallons. $5 times 90, they made $450 in revenue. So notice that the gas station can make more revenue by selling at a higher price. And that's because the product is inelastic. And again, we look at the causes of why a product is inelastic, and we learn that when a good is of high necessity, has few substitutes, is broadly defined, and the price change occurs over a short period of time, the product is inelastic, and it's okay to change the price because consumers aren't going to really have other options and they're going to keep buying your product. It's actually a benefit to increase your price. Now let's look at music sold through iTunes. Let's say the average song costs $1 and iTunes is selling in this one area, this one geographic locations, 100 songs per week. Well, if iTunes raises their price to $1.50, they may find they only sell 20 songs over in the same area over the same period of time. So in this case, price went up 50%, but quantity demanded dropped 80%. I plug in my values, 80 over 50, the value is 1.6, and that's an elastic product, greater than 1. And so an elastic product, it's a bad idea to increase prices. Sure enough, if we do the math, at $1, iTunes was selling 100 songs to this one area for $100. When they raised the price to $150, demand dropped significantly such that now they're only making $30 in revenue. See the huge decrease in revenue. Why is that? Well, iTunes is not a necessity. That's a pretty specific definition. There are many different substitutes to iTunes as far as ways to get music. You can download it illegally. You could download it through other services. That's, of course, what I would recommend. You could even buy one of those things called a CD. And again, in this example, I didn't really give you a time period, but if consumers had a long time to find these other options, then they're even more likely to stop buying from iTunes. So the product is elastic. Bad idea to increase the price, because at the higher price, people went away from the product and revenues declined greatly. So I made up some base examples here just to illustrate. It might be good on an exam to be able to come up with examples like this. The math is not too difficult. You see, I like to start with easy base quantities like 100. It's easy to do percent change from 100. Basic prices like $1 or $4. But the bottom line is, here are some good examples of how you have an inelastic PED and a elastic PED, and using values I can illustrate that it's good to increase the price on inelastic products and it's bad to increase the price on elastic products if your goal is to make more revenue. So that wraps up a summary of price elasticity of demand. A follow-up presentation will cover the other 3 elasticities.